Let's go live. Well, greetings from Riverton. And it is, normally I do these in the morning. And I will say good morning from Riverton. But this is an afternoon run, so we're going to do this one as a good afternoon from Riverton. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. A lot has happened in the past 15 hours. And this is not the first time that the FCC has surprised me on a Friday afternoon. And it's like, okay, why do you do this to me on a Friday afternoon? And yeah, we were just a tad late getting some news out on this. And also, too, we didn't put out a lot of information because obviously we weren't expecting this to take place. And Friday afternoons and evenings is usually time that I set aside for J1 and the internet broadcast stations. So a lot of that time is dedicated to that. It's time critical. And so we can't put out a lot of information. All I did was I was able to get enough time in there to say, hey, look, it's up. I told you LP 250 was on the radar, and well, there it is. The timing of this is there is a little bit. I think there's a backstory behind the timing of this coming up here. Earlier this week, I did have a conversation with Al Schuldner and Jim Bradshaw at FCC staff, and we were talking about various things. Specifically about some of the stuff that we talked about in the recent constituent surveys that I sent out. The first one regarding local programming, the second one regarding main studio. And in those, I, pretty much said, hey, what can we do for, we're looking at this possibility of a petition for rulemaking. That would make it a little easier for local programming to be defined based on the reality of where we are at, of how we're programming stations these days. Mainly trying to put more emphasis on local pre-recorded productions, which is something that is really not in the rules. As a definition of local programming. And then we were also looking at the main studio issue, and that was the most recent constituent survey that we did just this last week. And so we had a chance to talk about that. The FCC the attitude of staff was, well, you do something like that right now, you're going to really delay the window. And, that kind of tells me that the FCC does have this next LPFM window pretty much on the radar, in the hopper, and about, and almost ready to go. Now, we have the NCE window this November. So we're looking at next year sometime. So, I'm going to say probably mid-2022. Right now for the next window. During that conversation, I did mention LP 250. I always do when I talk to staff. Reminded them that they do have a petition for rulemaking in there, which was basically a continuation of a conversation that I had with staff in days before the cutoff. You see, we're not allowed to talk to staff 1 week before a full commission meeting on an item that's on the agenda. And 19193 at the time was on the agenda. And, about 3 weeks before, about 3 or 4 weeks before the scheduled meeting, the FCC will put out a tentative agenda. And since the Pai administration, we've been getting these draft circulation documents, or circulation drafts as we call them here, where we get a sneak preview of the information, of what the FCC is going to decide or what they're going to vote on. But because we're still allowed within like a 2 to 3 week period of that time, we're able to make ex parte presentations to the FCC, meaning, trying to, contacting staff to try to influence a decision. But then we turn around and we have to disclose that. I took that time to really get more intimate details as to why the FCC rejected the LP 250 and MB docket 19193. And this was just over a year ago here when they did that. And, it really came down to two issues. And those issues were related to the simplicity. They wanted to keep LPFM stupid proof, I guess, is what it was. And they wanted to keep it, simple. And, what we had proposed especially what we proposed in 11810, but what we also proposed in the earlier petition for rulemaking 11749 did have some more technical aspects to it, contour studies and stuff like that. And, at the time we said, and to this day, we still carry this position, that LPFM has matured. The service is over 20 years old now. And, a very large, a majority, at least 50% of the applications that were filed in the 2013 window had hired help. We had hired help. You had people like myself and Leo Ashcraft and John Brumel and Paul Bain, Will Floyd, Todd Urich, Clay Leander, a lot of people, as well as the professional folks, the Dutrells and all these other folks that were filing applications for LPFM stations. And if an LPFM station needed a second adjacent channel waiver, you had to go to hired help, because we're the only ones that really know how to measure contours and are able to get contour readings. That usually involves fairly high-priced software or somebody with a technical ability to be able to calculate those contours. There is a manual way to do it using FCC tools, but it is very hard, very long, and I could take a whole entire day and tell you how to do it, and you probably won't, and probably most people will say, what? So that's where, so at the last minute, I came back, we did more numbers here, and we said, okay, there were two big issues. The simplicity was one of them. They didn't want a bunch of contour studies. They didn't want a bunch of things. Now, of course, that would give LPFM the most flexibility. That would address the issues that we have right now with FM translators. That would address a lot of things, and it would allow LPFM stations to have the most maximized facility. The FCC wanted to keep the process simple. So that's why they completely shooed away the 11810 concept. They really didn't get into the RM-11749 concept, which was a lot closer to a simple than the 11810 one was. That's also the one that we called the 73815 regime, because what we were going to use was a mixture of distance and contour to try to maximize out an LPFM facility. So basically up to 250 watts. This is where the whole directional antenna issue came into play, because we were proposing to allow the use of directional antennas, and we were also proposing in those cases where they use the mix of distance and contour that they would have to use the translator style of interference remediation. And the FCC said no, they just want it simple. They just want circles. They want numbers, distances, and that's it. Okay, fine. The other issue was a concern over the Local Community Radio Act. And in one of the sections of the Local Community Radio Act, I believe it's section 3.31, it basically states that the FCC shall not reduce the distance separations between full service and low power FM station, or between LPFM to full service stations. And when the FCC created the first notice of proposed rulemaking back in 2011 for LP250, they stated, they said at the time, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to use the same distance numbers, because the LCRA pretty much states that it's the distance separation numbers that we're worried about. We can't go down below those numbers. However, we have this 20-kilometer buffer zone, which we'll talk about in just a moment, that is keeping, that basically, I'll tell you one thing. The buffer zone was originally created in the best interest of LPFM, or so the FCC says, 20 plus years ago, to allow an LPFM station to pretty much stay put if a full service station was to move a couple miles to the left or to the right. That was the original idea of the buffer zone. And then, of course, the LCRA came, codified distance separation into the rules, and and that's where we're at today. So you have the FCC said at the time, hey, look, here's what we'll do. Back in 2011, they said, hey, look, we're going to go ahead and keep the LP250 numbers the same as the LP100 numbers for co-channel first adjacent, and basically allow stations to LPFMs to cross into the buffer zone, to take their interfering contour into the buffer zone. And so there wouldn't be this perfect 20-kilometer buffer zone in these cases. They were fine with that in 2012. Now, of course, what killed LP250 in 2012 was a distraction called LP10, the 10-watt LPFM service. There was really two different factions that were trying to keep LP10 in the books. And that was first of all, there was a media justice coalition of non-broadcast media justice coalition, I should say. And the various groups that wanted to keep the LP10 because they figured that LP10 stations were going to be able to come into these small neighborhoods and broadcast kind of like little pirate stations. The other group that was holding that back was the Amherst Alliance. The Amherst Alliance, which was the late Nick Leggett and Don Shellhart. They wanted the LP10, and not only did they want the LP10, but they wanted the LP250 totally restricted to very deep rural areas using Census Bureau definitions that had been obsolete for at least 20 years. So the FCC figured, these are LPFM people that are saying that they want these restrictions, and then you had the LPFM triad. The triad is REC, Common Frequency, and Prometheus Radio Project. Now they were on the other side, and these are the groups that actually communicate with and interact with LPFM licensees and are actually supporting LPFM licensees in many ways, shapes, and forms. And they're saying, no, LP10 is not efficient. It's not going to be available as much as people think it is. Maybe if we're going to do that, let's do it LP50, make it a little more viable, make it a 50-watt service. And we were absolutely against any kind of geographic redlining of LP250s. We wanted LP250 to be available wherever it could fit. And so this is, so that's where we're at. The FCC decided, hey, there's infighting within LPFM. Nobody can agree on anything, so we're not going to do it. And that was the FCC's decision back in 2012 in the 6th report and order. Now, we came back and did RM-11909, which was basically bringing back what the FCC had originally proposed without the LP10 distraction, because LP10 was dust by then. We came back in without that distraction, but because of a case that was going on, which was the Razor K. Gorski Press case in Los Angeles. This little MX group that was it was originally a 4-station MX group. It got reduced down to a singleton in Pasadena on 92.7. The proposed transmitter site was in the foothills, just north of Pasadena and Altadena. And because it was in the foothills, meaning that there was a huge mountain behind them and a valley in front of them, it would have produced a huge service and interfering contour. Educational Media Foundation, K-Love, which has a station code channel down in Orange County, said, petition to deny, this LP100 curve is going to come into our service contour, which it did, but it still met distance separation. So we said, okay, if we're going to let these stations upgrade to 250, let's put a backstop in that says if you want to upgrade to 250, you can do so. However, if your interfering contour crosses into to an existing station, then you may have to bring your power back. You may not be able to run 250. You might have to run 175 just to keep those contours out. And so we put that into play. Nothing ever really became of that. Then next up was after the whole translator mess with the AM stations, we did RM-11810, and we did a lot of things in there. Technically, this is where we did the 73815 regime, where we said, okay, since and keeping in mind, we still are under the impression that the FCC is only interested in the distance separation distances, not the formula. And so we came in and said, look, LP10 numbers were on the books when the LCRA was passed. Yes, LP10 was taken out, but here's what we're going to do. We want to use the LP10 numbers as a baseline, as a minimum distance, and then use contours to spread it out, to allow a station to maximize itself out to whatever contour that it could go to without overlapping. We also said, look, translators, the LPFM to translator relationship is not even a part of this distance separation mandate that the LCRA has. So we said, let's give LPFMs the option to use contours instead of distance to protect translators. Okay, the FCC eventually, the FCC did address that in 19193. And guess what? They said it was too complex. It was complex. So they weren't going to do it. And they did that in the notice of proposed rulemaking. And we kind of raised a fit in comments. Of course, NAB had their fit. Everybody had their little fits. And the FCC finally came out in the report and order in 19193 to say, okay, the reason why we're not doing this is because of the complexity and because of the LCRA. And this is the first time that we got the FCC saying, okay, in order to remain compliant with the LCRA, you have to maintain that 20-kilometer buffer zone. Okay, fine. So in those last 2 weeks that I was able to actually work with the FCC after the circulation draft came out and before the cutoff, what we call the sunshine period, 1 week before the meeting, I did a whole ton of numbers, ran a lot of reports, wrote up a whole new proposal, brand new numbers, and said, look, here's what we want to do. We're going to address this. Let's just take what we did with LP 100, do exactly the same with LP 250, nothing special, no new contours, no new anything, and we're just going to have a separate table for LP 250. I think there was some appetite for that, but the FCC is like, sorry, you're late to the party. So the FCC basically rejected the simple idea at the time, but basically opened the door and said you could file again. You could refile this again. And that's exactly what we did. 1 month later, we filed the petition for rulemaking that just went on to public notice last Friday. And what we're looking at here is a simple 250 proposal, which addressed these issues. Just added a second separation chart for LP 250, different numbers, no changes to LP 100, and it was envisioned as an upgrade for existing LP 100 stations. And I made a note of that on the call the other day because we were worried about the delays to the window. And I said, look, there's an LP 250 petition for rulemaking out there. It is not dependent on the window. If anything, I want it more for upgrades because the reason is I would prefer all new construction permit filings during a window to be LP 100. And the reason is so we can gauge the demand for new stations. If there's enough demand and stations are able to space themselves out by the LP 100 distances, then great. Okay, we got more voices with LP 100. But if after the window is over with and after everything is settled down and there's still room, why not allow these stations to upgrade to 250 if they're still able to? And that was the idea. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And we're also taking phone calls at 1-855-HI-MICHI, 1-855-446-4244. The line will answer. You'll hear me. I'll be talking, but I won't have you up until I bring you up on the board. You'll just hear what I'm saying. And make sure you turn your computer speakers or your TV speakers down if you do, because there will be a latency and a delay, and it's going to sound horrible. So that's basically what just came up on Friday was what we filed last year. And pretty much everything that you know about LP 100 would be the same with LP 250. The only difference is the numbers are going to change. And these, there we go. So these are the new numbers for, the difference in the distance separations between an LP 100 and an LP 250. So, for example, where a Class A station would be required to protect, or an LP 100 would be required to protect a Class A station, is 67 kilometers. If that LPFM station was a LP 250, that number's increased to 72. So that takes into consideration the larger interfering contour of a LP 250 station versus an LP 100 station. And you could see all the rest of the numbers there. And so, yeah, that would mean that there would be a 29-kilometer separation between an LP 100 and an LP 250. and a 31 kilometer separation between two LP 250 stations. LPFM stations would be able to accept interference from each other just as long as the distance separations are maintained. The other thing that would be coming back is a remnant from the first decade of LPFM, and that would be intermediate frequency, the IF. That is plus or minus 3 or 54 channels, or 10.6 or 10.8 megahertz. And this is consistent with the translator rules. The FCC requires translators 100 watts or more to also protect the intermediate frequencies of full-service stations. We're basically doing the same thing here at 101 watts or above. And so basically it's just consistency with the rules. And that IF has to do with the internal oscillator in FM receivers. This is very commonplace in the full service industry. And again, it's commonplace with FM translators at that are 100 watts or greater. So those are basically the numbers that we had proposed based on the actual measurements. Now, these are, just to give you an idea of what we mean by contours and such, and how those numbers came to be. Every broadcast station has a protected service contour. That is the area where 50% of the receivers, 50% of the time, receive a 60 dBu signal, 57 if you're a Class B1 station in the commercial band, 54 if you're a Class B station in the commercial band. And then every station has an interfering contour. And the interfering contour is where you would put a signal in 50% of the receivers 10% of the time. And for co-channel, it's always that's always 20 dB less. So if it's 60 protected, it's going to be 40 interfering. First adjacent is 6 dB less, or in the case of a 60, 54. And second adjacent, as well as third adjacent for other services, it's plus 40. So 60 as a protected, 100 as an interfering. Now, what the FCC did for co-channel and first adjacent is they added an arbitrary 20-kilometer buffer zone outside of the standard protected contour for the full-service station. So basically, it's 60 dBu plus 20 kilometers, and that's where we come up with the distances that are required. It's the protected contour plus the interfering contour plus an extra 20 kilometers rounded. That's how you get the minimum distance separation requirements to LPFM stations. For LPFM stations to protect other facilities. So questions are, what does this do for the LPFM protection of translators? Unfortunately, this doesn't really cover that per se. There's still a lot of relief that we need done. Now, one of the things that's also going on right now is that there is still an active petition for reconsideration that was filed by Todd Urich and I believe Paul Boehm on the Prometheus side was also responsible for this. And they pretty much went into the process detail of how the FCC handled the way that they handled the various issues that were rejected. And they're not just looking at the LP250, but they're also looking at certified transmitters, how the FCC is still requiring certified transmitters, which unfortunately at this time I still think needs to be required, just because of the unattended nature of LPFM stations, and also mainly because of the imported junk that we're getting from China and other places that's being sold on Amazon and eBay. Now, Amazon just recently cracked down on some of these sellers that are selling equipment without FCC IDs on them. But I just still see a lot of ways that that these folks can fraud that, and I just don't have I don't feel good that Amazon is going to stop the flow of the illegal junk, and a lot of it ends up on pirate stations. And I don't see them really doing anything about it. I put in a compromise and said, look, if you have certain people with certain qualifications, like a chief operator rule for LPFMs using non-certified equipment, then yeah, perhaps we could do something here. But just opening the door is going to allow junk to be put on the air, and that's just going to make the FAA complaints go flying through the roof. We don't need that. We really don't need that. They also went out on the directional antenna bit, which, of course, the directional antennas were pretty much in high gear during the 11810 and the rulemaking proceeding because of the issues regarding the contour protection for translators and such. And, a lot of the stuff that they rejected, the problem was that the FCC didn't realize that most of that need for directional antennas beyond the use of them for second adjacent waivers and Mexico and other international stuff was not really going to be necessary. I mean, because and for Channel 6, the FCC basically stated, okay, if you're doing this to protect Mexico, you don't need a proof of performance. If you're doing this for a second adjacent waiver, you don't need the proof of performance. But if you're doing it for any other reason, including protecting Channel 6, if you're down below 92, then you do need it. And that's and that is inconsistent right now with FM translators, because FM translators have been allowed to request these very weird directional patterns and then not build what they were supposed to build. And it's very hard to get the FCC to respond to a complaint. I mean, we have stations that are all over the country that are getting interference. And the FCC right now is so short-staffed, and they really don't have the budget for a ton of staff, where they're having to play triage. And, interference to aeronautical communications, to the satellite services, anything with an international implication is going to get priority over an LPFM station getting banged by a translator. It's just going to be that way, unfortunately. And I mean, there's only so much that we could do. Byron saying, I'm ready for LP 250. Cool beans. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat, but I just wanted to just give you an update on that. So, yeah, this doesn't do anything specific for the translators. I really think what we need to continue doing is we need to be continuing to put in applications that request a waiver. But you have to have a really good reason for a waiver. And the FCC has denied these in the past. And when I'm saying a waiver of the distance separation to an FM translator, if it can be shown that you could do it with contours. And I'm really hoping that maybe down the road we could address that again. But here, the thing is right now the instant issue is related to the growth of LPFMs to go to 250. Now, who's going to benefit the most from this is going to be the rural areas. Areas that are not as spectrum crowded as the full service station, as the major urban core markets are. Now, I have been able to find a couple situations in urban situations where LP250 could happen. And this is the reason why we're against any kind of geographic redlining of LP250 based on market size, distance from the center core, all that. That's why we're opposing this. I think in the last study we did on this about a year ago, we found one case in Philadelphia and at least one case in Southern California where we could put an LP250 in a top 20 city. And I think there's a couple other places across the country where we can do LP250 in a top 20 city. But once you get past, a certain area, a certain population demographic, a certain population density, then the opportunities skyrocket. And we are still at well over 50% of LPFMs having a path to 250 from their current site. They may have to change channels, but there is quite a bit of path to 250. And one of the obviously when this all happens, we expect the National Association of Broadcasters to fight us. The NAB is going to fight us tooth and nail on this because, they just don't want the additional stations. And, they don't want LPFM to grow. They want us to just disappear. They want LPFM to just go away and be no more. But we're here to stay. And we're going to grow. And we're going to grow in a way that is, compatible with our spectrum ecosystem. We're going to grow. And one of the big arguments that, we made in this petition for rulemaking is something that I experience every day here living in Riverton. And that is that when you live in a rural area where there's a lot of farms, remember, these are the folks that put the food on your table. There's a lot of farms and stuff out here. And so obviously people live further away from the town, from the nexus of the community. They live further away from Main Street. But, they're just as important than a quadrant of Detroit or a quadrant of Philadelphia. They're just as important. And for those of us who live out in the rurals, something here in Riverton that's going on in Marcellus Springs, 4.5 miles away, is hyper-local. I mean, our mail comes through Marcellus Springs. Our junior high school, our elementary school is in Marcellus Springs. If I lived on the other side of the road, our fire department would be Marcellus Springs. And therefore, the argument is, if you're more out here in the sticks and the boonies and the flyover country, guess what? Your hyper local area is going to be more than 4, 5, 6 miles. Because that's where we do a 20-mile drive to the nearest grocery store. Sure, we've got a Dollar General 4 miles away in one direction, 3 miles away in the other. But if you want a real grocery store, you got to drive 20 miles away. And this is one of the things that we are marketing LP250 on, is that kind of growth. And a lot of stations do qualify. Now, I know there's going to be some out there that don't. And I'm sorry, but, unfortunately, spectrum congestion in a lot of areas has done it. And, of course, the translator stuff that happened in 2016, 17, and 18 destroyed a lot of chances. But, we still have some hope in some core urban areas. We've identified core urban areas where LPFM may be available in the next window. So there's a lot of good information out there. Let's see. We're taking calls at 1-855-HI-MICHI. I'm not going to be on here for too much longer. I just wanted to get some information out to everybody. But the idea is, let's get an LP250 service out there. Let's get it going. This is also just to say, hey, NAB, we're here. We're not going away. And we are just as entitled to spectrum as you are. And, you know, the idea of spectrum, the spectrum doesn't belong to the NAB. The non-commercial spectrum doesn't belong to NPR or EMF. The spectrum belongs to the people, and the people have the right to access the airwaves in an orderly fashion. And commission licensing is that orderly fashion. And we're going to make opportunities available as much as we can. And that's the whole idea behind 250. The FCC right now, the concept of doing anything for rural areas, there is appetite at the FCC for this. Especially like where it comes to broadband. There's a lot of folks out here. I cannot get a decent cell phone signal here in Riverton. You know, we lack broadband. We only have one real broadband choice here, which is Comcast. Not even Verizon. Verizon doesn't even put DSL or fiber down this way. And again, we get no 4G service out here. We get no LTE service out here. Despite what the coverage maps say, it doesn't exist. And, you know, the whole coverage map thing with wireless services is, in my opinion, one of the biggest frauds ever. Because it never works out. It never works out to be that way. So for now, you can now file comments in this proceeding. I'm waiting to see when the deadline's going to be, because I think it's 30 days. I think this is going to get in. If this gets into the Federal Register, then I think it's 30 days from that filing, from the date that it goes into Federal Register. So that's why I'm not putting a drop by dead date on the comment filing yet. I will announce that later. But for right now, and this goes right exactly to what John Griffin just asked. What do we do? All you have to do, if you want to file comments, and I'm going to ask you all to read the petition for rulemaking first. If you go to recnet.com, click on the first story that's up there about, we have a news story up there about the LP250. I wrote that late last night after finishing up all the J1 stuff and before going to bed. I did write a piece on it, and there is a link in there to the petition for rulemaking that we filed a year ago. Go ahead and read that over. Look at our arguments that we've made. Look at our rural arguments. Look at the various arguments that were made, and then look at the actual proposal. We've already, given, we gave you the numbers here. I mean, these are the distance separation numbers. Talk about how that's going to help. Especially LPFM stations that are in these rural areas. And talk about your station. If you have a station, talk about your station and what you're doing for your community. And especially if you're in a rural or suburban area, talk about how you're covering things, that you're handling things for your community that the full service stations, both the commercial and the NPR stations, are not doing. And, and we make that clear in there. Say, look, these rural LPFMs are local people talking to local people. And someone is more likely to listen to a rural station in a local area than they would, the big station in the middle of town, which only cares about where their advertising base is. And that's the real difference between the rural and the urban full service, the urban area stations is, do you reach, you have a better opportunity to reach your audience than these urban area stations do. Go to the so just think about those things. And one of the other things that we're going to be working on, and we'll be doing a database run this weekend, is we'll do a database run this weekend to update our LP250 check site, which is check.lp250.com. That's check.lp250.com. Check.lp250.com. The information that's up there right now is about a year old. Don't use it right now. We'll announce on Facebook. We'll announce when the site's been updated with more current and more correct information for stations. And then once you go to that site, you'll just be able to put your current station's call letters in. It'll give you a little channel report, and it will say whether you can upgrade or not, if this is passed, and if not, why you can't upgrade. And that's what we're looking at. We're also going to update the My LPFM tool, which is used by existing stations that need to make modifications. And we will identify channels that will have a 250 opportunity if this was to go through. And so that's pretty much where we are right now. Obviously, if you are, once we get to a point where we start working on the window and we start giving out information on, channels that will be available for new stations, we will obviously give information on whether those channels would be upgradable in today's environment. Now, of course, the reality in the window is maybe somebody else will file too, and it will keep you from doing it, but we give you the channels that would give you the best chances. So once you have all that information in order, and once you know where you stand on this, then you go to the FCC's electronic comment filing system, fcc.gov/ECFS. That's fcc.gov/ECFS. Echo Charlie Foxtrot Sierra, electronic comment filing system. And then on the top of the menu, on the top menu, you're going to see an option that says submit a filing. You click on submit a filing. And then you can do, and then the proceeding is RM-11909. RM-11909. Now, what you may want to do before you go to the FCC system is write up your comments. Write them up in a, go into Microsoft Word or Open Office or whatever, and type up your comments. Make it something really nice, something concise, but also you can be descriptive and, tell them about your station, tell the FCC about your station and why this, service would benefit us, would benefit your station. Fortunately, in our case, one of the things that we have, though, that's working good for us is we have a ton of public record already in support of LP250 because, look, we collected comments were collected in the fourth notice of proposed rulemaking back in 2011. They were collected in RM-11749. They were collected in RM-11810. They were also collected in MB Docket 19193. So we already have 4 sources of supporting record with a lot of positive testimonials. But that doesn't mean that we don't need any more. That just means we need to refresh what we did back then and come in gangbusters in this proceeding. So if you've got your stuff together, if you've got your information together, again, if you want to get information on where your station stands, we should hopefully have that information by open of business on Monday. That is one of our long runs that we have to do to get the to get all the data in there. And there has been changes. There has been changes. A lot of translator activity has caused a lot of changes and stuff like that. So what may have been available a year ago may not be available now, or vice versa. So that's where we're at. If anybody still has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat right now. I'm going to make this last call. Or 1-855-HI-MICHI on the phone. And I'm sorry for the Saturday last minute kind of live chat, but this has been my first real break since Friday afternoon when we go into the J1 cycle. This has been my first real opportunity to actually be able to do something that is not related to a time-sensitive function. So, there we go. All right, hearing nothing and seeing nothing. Again, thank you everyone for your support. I've been getting a lot of supportive messages since the rulemaking petition was announced. Now, I want to stress though that the RM process that we're going through right now, this is just the first process. Normally, any petition to the FCC should get to this point. What the FCC will do then is we'll take the comments, and then they will have to decide. And what it will be is it will be probably a recommendation from the Media Bureau, which means that there's going to need to be some ex parte pushing on this, and the commissioners, because in order to get a notice of proposed rulemaking, we need a majority vote from the commissioners. Currently, we have 4 commissioners. We have 1 vacant seat on the majority. We're still waiting for President Biden to nominate the 5th commissioner. And so, we have Brendan Carr and Nate Symington on the minority side, on the Republican side. And we have acting chairwoman Janet Rosenworcel and Jeffrey Starks on the majority Democrat side. So in order for us right now, if this was to come up to the commission right now, we would need to have bipartisan, we would need to have a 3-1 support on this at least. Now, I can tell you right now that when Michael O'Reilly left the FCC, the NAB lost their lapdog. However, since O'Reilly and Pai have been gone, Carr has really pumped up the politics at the FCC. I mean, it's very rare that you see releases come out of the FCC, either party, that mentions the other party. The Democratic proposal to do this, the Republican GOP telecom proposal, whatever. You don't see that normally at this level, but it's been amped up to that level. Now Nate Symington, who I've not dealt with directly yet, but I have dealt with other folks in other proceedings, and he seems to be more moderate. And I'm thinking maybe that's either just because of his nature, or B, because that's, he's trying to get his feet wet. And I have more faith in Nate Symington than I do in Brendan Carr as being that deciding third vote, if this was to come up right now. I mean, which it won't. We're still at least another year out from any decision on LP 250. But again, that's not going to hold up the window, because the window can still go, because we still have an LP 100 service. Window will still go, and that's one of the things we're making sure of. And that was one of the things I mentioned to the FCC back a few days ago. I said, you know, even if this LP 250 was to move forward, it's not dependent on the window. The window could still go with LP 100. And I really think that's one of the reasons why the FCC, I think we finally gave the FCC a wake-up call that there's still a lot of people out there that are serious about LP 250. So the petition's out there. The lines are open. Staff has your attention. Staff is listening now. The pipe is open. Remember, the proceeding is RM-11909, RM-11909. That is the proceeding to file on for this. So again, for those who are joining late, the FCC has given a rulemaking number, which is a routine process, to a petition for rulemaking that REC filed a year ago, just over a year ago, in response to the rejection of LP 250 in the technical proceeding of MB docket 19193. And we basically took what the FCC had to say and we made it into a new petition for rulemaking. The new LP 250 proposal is mainly geared towards rural, but there will be a small amount of urban opportunity in there. But it's mostly for rural, suburban, like markets, like medium, small, and rural markets. And it's just what we're doing with LP 100 and just basically duplicating it on a different service class for LP 250. So no new special contour studies or anything like that. The FCC didn't want that. The 20-kilometer buffer zone stays in. That means that the required distances between stations would increase as an LP 250. Now, we're not getting rid of LP 100. LP 100 will still be around, and our idea is that stations should apply for LP 100 in the window. John asks, will the FCC listen to Congress by voice of our Congresspeople? Absolutely. Absolutely. And what you're going to want to do is and wait until after this proceeding is going. Don't do it right now. Wait until after this proceeding is, maybe after the comment deadline. Have your congressperson send a formal letter to Acting Chairwoman Jessica Rosen-Worcel, inquiring about low power 250, inquiring about that. And normally what happens in these cases, is on those kinds of letters, especially if it is coming from the chairperson's office, they will eventually publish not only the letter that your congressperson sent to the acting chairperson, but the acting chairperson's response. We see those pop up every so often. We saw that pop up just recently on a traveler's information station, and that kind of had me looking at program content on the AMTIS stations, and is it too restrictive? We were originally going to come in with a proposal on public safety that would have restricted back the nature of public safety programming on LPFM, but widening it on the AM side so they were kind of co-equal with each other. AM travelers information stations are very restrictive on what you can say on there, what kind of information you can give out, where an LPFM station that's operating under as far as a government public safety agency, they can do whatever they want on the station. There's no restrictions, even though the FCC wants them to do at least 50% public safety programming. There's no mandate for it. So, and, part of what we were petitioning had to do with a couple of abuses that took place in the public safety sector in the 2013 and following the 2013 window, including attempts to claim a non-government organization as a government, as an organization that has public safety jurisdiction. In other words, they provide police and fire service or fire services in a particular area when they don't. And we had one station in California try that. I called them out on it. And then they eventually said, well, the county gave us a EAS receiver. BFD. That does not mean that you have a covenant or contract to provide emergency services in your city. That doesn't mean that at all. Because they're trying to get around the multiple ownership rule is what they're trying to do. We had a volunteer fire department, somebody who should be a non-government public safety, file multiple applications at the same location, different channels, hoping to see which one would bite. Technically, they're allowed to do it. One of the things we wanted was an anti-duplication rule for public safety that said, if you have more than one LPFM that covers, a 50% overlap of the other, then you got to have a good technical reason why you should have that. Otherwise, you can't have it. So that's pretty much where we're at. Simple 250, RM-11909 or 11909 is the proceeding. And that's pretty much all I have for right now. If you go to recnet.com, we'll have more information. We'll be writing new fact questions in the FAQ. And one of the projects this weekend will be is to update the data at check.lp250.com. Of course, all breaking news goes to Facebook first. If you're not following us on Facebook, there it is right there, RecNet. Follow us on Facebook, and we will get you information out. There'll be information on there, and as things break, that's where it goes. So, like that old saying goes, when news breaks, we'll fix it. Anyway, I guess that's it for me. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to dump them in the Facebook, and we'll find you there. We're also, we look at LPFM. We look at LPFM Tech Advice since we run those groups. We also look at LPFM Solidarity. And that's pretty much where we're at. Thank you for your support. Again, maybe this time it will be the charm. I don't know. This would be the third time, though. I mean, if this goes to NPRM, this would be the third time it goes to a notice of proposed rulemaking. Maybe the third time is the charm, but right now we've got the NAB is going to be our biggest opposition here, and we've dealt with the NAB in the past. All right, again, thank you everybody, and we'll see you soon.